talking to book people about books and other stuff.
Okay, so today for talking to book people about books and other stuff, I'm going to give a call in just a moment to my friend Julian Sayarer, who is the author of this incredible new book, 50 Miles Wide, in which he cycles across Israel and occupied Palestine. And we're going to talk to him a little bit about that book. I'm just going to find out what's been going on with him and this isolated world we're living in. If you haven't heard of him before, not only pick up the new book, 50 Miles Wide, which is, of course, available on our website right now, but also check out Interstate, one of his previous books, which is an incredible travelogue that first introduced us to his writing and is a unbelievable account of a hitchhike across America. He's written 5 books in total, so let's give him a ring. So what's going on anyway? So where are you? You're in London. Is that where you're seeing this out?
I am in London. I mean, there was obviously the initial impulse to go somewhere more remote, more scenic, less crowded. But at the same time, London's sort of in some ways unrecognisable, sort of the air. It's so nice to actually be in a city and realise that you can experience what clean air sort of smells and tastes like.
Right, because your daily exercise is presumably pretty bike-related. Cycling in London is presumably a lot more pleasant.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a couple of sort of essential exercise mixed with reconnaissance of the city rides going on, and there is this eerie kind of quieter than Christmas feel to the central area, which of course we're used to seeing so full of business and bustle. I think here in London you've got sort of 8 million people, best part of it. And, I think things like the delivery economy, you've got the drivers on 0-hour contracts that are completely now overwhelmed with work. Yeah. And then, I think some of the youngsters are out driving and take the boy races, if you will, taking advantage of the streets being empty.
It seems like to me that there's like a bit of a flip side thing going on as well, though, because we're seeing like the very worst in people, or that exaggeration of the very worst. And then we're also seeing lots of examples where people are it's the very best of them as well. I guess everything's just extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, in this very extreme case, we see that, of course, where the political will is there, all things become possible, the absolutely sort of central importance of the National Health Service to our country, to our society, the breaking point that it was at. Yeah. And in this absolutely extreme way now gets kind of stress tested and revealed. Yeah. And I mean, it's great, it's really inspiring in some ways that the resources of the state can be mobilized in that way. And I suppose the challenge is to make sure that we don't go back to such an extreme version of normal that people were on before. And then equally, I think there are lessons for things like climate change and the climate crisis. Again, where the political will is there, we can actually reorientate our societies really quite quickly, to be honest.
And what about writing? Have you found it given you more impetus and space to write in, or have you found yourself too distracted?
It takes a little bit of discipline, because actually I think at this moment where so many things are sort of swirling on the macro level, it's very easy to get distracted or worried, and so maybe it's a bit more effort to create space to write. But when I do, that's as it always is for me, really. That's one of the things where you can take this very sort of chaotic, swirling world and put it down on paper. And then as a travel writer in particular, it's just travel writing is kind of going to a new place to find a completely new way of life or a new perspective. And so it's quite a sort of privilege, I think, in some ways, to have that completely new way of life come to your home.
What about the reading? Do you read as well? Have you been reading? If so, have your reading habits changed so far?
I'm reading a lot of news and articles, which I always do and always try to do less of. And it's probably a case that I'm trying even harder to do less of that at the moment. Right. And then I've got, the last fifth of Moby Dick. And then I've got, I got some Dostoevsky in reserve. Okay. Not to mention, all the bookshelves in general. There's a really nice value to classics at this moment, because I like that sort of grappling with the big questions,
Yeah.
Which they do, but also the pace of them. As you have so much kind of communication and entertainment now, which is so meta. It's kind of describing everything in the broadest possible terms.
Yeah.
Whereas, I feel like the classics go into the character of Ahab or the character of Raskolnikov to sort of, develop the same moral themes.
This seems to be giving some people more headspace to think that they can actually tackle fully those classics, because people find them daunting sometimes. Maybe just the fact that you might be able to pick it up, just that bit more regularly. A little bit each day. People, they can dwell. They can dwell on it. They can appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to be honest, that regularity is the very same way that people watch their series. The idea of dropping in and out. And actually, to be honest, if you look at something like, Brothers Karamazov was serialized in the St. Petersburg Times, week by week. A lot of these novels that we now see as sort of a single stack, they were episodes.
So what about how weird has it been to have this coming out in amongst this? Everyone's being affected, but that is a considerable pain for a writer to have that moment where their book sort of heads out there, and it's logistically quite difficult for the whole trade to get it out there, and B, you've got this thing that you can't get on your bike and go and talk about it.
I mean, a book coming out is an interesting process at the best of times. It's very much a process of sort of giving creative birth, and you sort of you put, especially this, with riding through Palestine and writing about it and really trying to grasp some big issues, of what the meaning of freedom is, the nature of the Palestinian struggle with military occupation, the sort of small but beautiful role of the bicycle in all of that.
When did you actually make the trip? When did you make the cycling trip through Israel and Palestine? Because that, the publication date is just a date when we get the book out there to the readers. When did it take place, and kind of what motivated it? What were you really after from it, for you or your readers?
I mean, it took place across a couple of visits, spanning 6 weeks in 2018. Right. So we were already the best part of 2 years away. The bicycle has always been for me this really enriching way of traveling, of seeing a place, of talking to people, and of getting a sort of slower sense of what the politics of the world might be, whether that was northwest China or deep south of the United States or Palestine. And so I'd always had that sense, irrespective of, the beautiful landscapes, having some knowledge of the cycling community in Palestine, and that despite the conditions there, with things like military checkpoints on the roads, there's still people that really love riding. So I always had this curiosity that sort of drew me there. And then when would that have been? 2017 at Edinburgh Book Festival, there was an Israeli author there, and I talked to her about past books, whether it was hitchhiking across the United States or cycling around the world. And again, this kind of on the ground view of the world that you get, this roadside politics, which in its own way, as I say, kind of kicks against this very big meta narrative that we of the world in a lot of modern news. So this Israeli author had said, that would be the ideal way to see the countries, Palestine, Israel, to see the politics. You'd see the wall that separates the land and the checkpoints, and it would really make clear a lot of the issues at play.
Was the idea that the bike in particular, because the bike is in itself quite a sort of, I don't know, doesn't somehow incite kind of nervousness. It's a positive, it's generally regarded positively. I mean, we see that at the very beginning of the book when you're talking with a Israeli border control guard who sort of thinks that you're well cool for having for being a bike aficionado. But is that the idea? Is that why it's such a perfect method?
I think so. I mean, I just love traveling on a bicycle. So I think that the things you mentioned, which are true, I kind of almost have over the years found out inadvertently, and they become all the more apparent in an area of heightened tension, such as occupied Palestine. And I had settlers with their, guns on patrol stop me. And I do think there's a tendency with the bicycle, even if you're still confronting some pretty difficult things, people are probably more likely to laugh at you than to, you know, to be aggressive towards you.
Right. Is there something that stands out, an encounter that stands out, a person that you met that struck you, and why?
I think the iconic moment for me is a young lad called Saddam, who's a cyclist from Hebron. The occupation all across Palestine is brutal, but Hebron is particularly bad because it's very deep inside recognized Palestinian territory. You know, you have something like a few hundred Israeli settlers who are religious extremists being guarded by a few thousand Israeli soldiers who are often like nationalistic themselves, enhance the discrimination against the Palestinians. And in amongst this place, this very hard place, you meet Saddam, who was a friend of the guy that I actually met, first of all, a big guy in the local cycling club. And Saddam was just a young rider, must have been 10 years younger than me, so early 20s. And, you know, he had his Lycra and he had his road bike. And whereas the older guy from the club seemed a little bit lazy and not so keen to ride, you could just really feel that Saddam, all throughout the day that I'd been around, really wanted to ride. Right. And I think just seeing him riding, we rode in the evening, you know, not really a word of English or Arabic between us, but we just rode together for like 30 kilometers or something. And the joy that you could actually see as someone who, I would have had my road bike and my Lycra as a teenager in the Midlands. And that sort of sense of ownership of the road and that purpose, and like, you know, the dusk is coming down and the sun's setting and it's beautiful, and that sort of spirit of the bicycle matched with his fear of me stopping to refill my water bottle because there are military checkpoints in the area and he's been harassed repeatedly in this area. Right. I think that really just encapsulated both the sort of, you know, the ability of the bicycle to help transcend this occupation, and yet equally a sort of inescapability of it all. And you know, it's a very sad but equally really sort of like touching and beautiful moment. And I think it, you know, that's probably the one that stays with me as much as anything, because I think it's inherently very positive. It's a more positive force than a negative one. I think he was an inspiring lad, basically.
You know, there's a thing at the beginning, early on in 50 Miles Wide, where you're talking to an Israeli, and you're talking about, you stop yourself and you say something along the lines of, you tell us, the reader, something along the lines of, look, I'm in danger of falling into that thing where I've come into a place with a set of opinions, and I'm in danger of leaving again with the same opinions intact, you know, unchecked. And I just wonder, without kind of giving away the whole arc of 50 Miles Wide, whether there's any element of your preconceptions and opinions before you went on a journey, what was the thing that was most fundamentally changed, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one, because travel and my travels have often changed a lot or something, and there's an expectation to begin with of that. I actually think it's maybe, again, a bit paradoxical, but what changed most was probably the strength with which I believed what I believed to begin with. Right. And I'm not, you know, I'm not really a sides person. The Palestinians are suffering a great injustice. And there are, of course, Israeli people who don't want to be complicit in that injustice, and who are often side by side with Palestinians trying to fight for the end of these apartheid conditions. I think one thing that did change is I did understand a little more of how afraid some of those Israelis who are minded towards justice and a real peace process, how afraid they feel within the hyper-nationalism of Israeli society. And I think in the UK or the US, people have maybe got a very small insight into what that might be like under Brexit and some of the extreme nationalism of that, or Donald Trump. And then equally, you know, to be more positive, I think the strength of the Palestinian spirit, you know, this innate sense of freedom, the dignity with which they face the occupation, the absolute indestructibility of Palestinian dignity, because I meet people as I travel who express, you know, in their second language as well, but with such wonderful articulacy, and just an indistinguishable honour and dignity, their rights. That was really wow, frequently.
Listen, there's one other question I wanted to ask you. A lot of us have this thing where if you're really trying to wind down, you're trying to relax, you're trying to detox, there might be a place or a scene. Certainly I have a location which I go back to and just think about, almost to turn my mind off. Do you have, based on all of the incredible places you've been to and all of that, you've literally circumnavigated the world by bicycle, do you still have one place that you go back to if you're trying to, I don't know, if you're struggling to get to sleep or something or whatever, when you just want to get completely escape, or say you've been stuck in a house in London for, X number of weeks. Is there somewhere you go back to that overrides everything else?
I was writing about this the other day, the sort of like the luxury of travel within the mind kind of thing. Yeah. I definitely mentioned the Columbia River in Oregon, where it opens out to the Pacific. It's beautiful.
Right.
The northern Peloponnese coast as well, riding towards Corinth is a gorgeous one. I mean, Palestine as well. The West Bank, Palestine is beautiful, and it has these gorgeous rolling olive groves across the hills and this like beautiful red earth. Yeah. And I think in the book I described them as a cardiogram. It's just this gorgeous like undulating boom, 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 boom. When you look out across the landscape, and there's this sort of mist that settles because I guess within the topography of the hills. Yeah. And I remember a few evenings, sort of struggling with the cycling and looking out across them. And that's achingly beautiful. And it doesn't do to get sort of inured to the beauty of the earth. No.
Awesome. Listen, thanks for taking the call.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks for chatting. Maybe, as I say, I hope we'll be able to do it on a couple of stalls in Mr. B's as well and talk about the book in more detail in the autumn, maybe.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Back in normalcy, a different normalcy.
Exactly. Awesome. That's fantastic. Cheers, mate.
Well, take care, Nick.
Bye.
Please note, no book people were harmed in the making of this film, though some were technologically challenged. All books are available from www.mrbsemporium.com.
Keep safe and keep reading.